Rights Commission. Let's begin by introducing ourselves. Graydon, do you want to start?
Yeah, Graydon Crapel, one of the City Council liaisons.
Corrine Moore, Commissioner.
David Baum, Commissioner.
Leslie Krause, Stambaugh, Commissioner and Chair.
Pam Dent, Commissioner.
Linda Winkler, Commissioner.
Vivian Chang, Commissioner and Vice Chair.
Dwight Wilson, Commissioner.
Sunita Yasapati, another City Council liaison to the Human Rights Commission.
Thank you. It looks like we have one person who said yes and one person who said maybe. Fadia? Public. Let me just say that it's, you have 5 minutes to speak. We won't respond until all of them are done, and then we might ask you questions. Thank you.
Hello, nice to meet you all. I'm the Vice President of the Human Rights Youth Coalition, and I came here today because of the increased police ratings in Ann Arbor, and it really is a concern because you see most of them are targeting youth and people who, you know, they don't know what to expect, and it's happening to them, and sometimes they don't even have a criminal record. And it's so essential to make sure that everyone in Ann Arbor feels that they are safe in their own home. So it is so critical that I think it is important for all of you. You probably all know about the situation, and I hope you can maybe talk about it a little and give me your stance on it and what you guys are doing to tackle this very concerning issue. Thank you.
Maybe?
Can anyone comment on what some background on that?
Excuse me? Do you want to speak or not?
Sure.
Someone just spoke before me that didn't really give context for what she was saying. I mean, it's not surprising the police are harassing people, especially the youth, but I haven't read the Ann Arbor News in a while, so if someone knows anything, if they could, I mean, especially for, let's think about all the people who are watching this meeting. If someone just listened to this very eloquent woman speak, and they wouldn't know what she was talking about, they'd have to go Google it. So if someone could fill in like 20 seconds, just so like the people who are watching this on TV in a week, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much in advance.
Thank you. Would you like to say you only spoke for 2 minutes? You could have 3 more if you want.
Just
to
a
give him
brief
context.
background information that he was talking about. Basically, essentially, the past year or so, it's become more random, these raids, and they target certain parts that are, you would say, more poor or not as wealthy, or just, especially with the ICE debacle, it has happened more and more. Essentially, it's an immigration issue, and they're targeting these people who may be undocumented immigrants or have say parents who are undocumented, or some issues regarding in that issue. So because they are targeting those people, and since Ann Arbor has been such a welcoming city, we need to keep it that way. So that is why I brought it up, and I don't know if I can go into more details without going over time. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Agenda.
Are those the only people that signed up to speak?
Yes. Discussion around the agenda.
I think consistently with last time, it might make sense to open up a little bit more public comment after we talk a little bit more about trespass, so that if anyone has anything substantive to speak or share, then that can be addressed more in context.
I had thought to give a few minutes at the end if people wanted to speak for 3 minutes at a time.
At the end of the meeting?
At the end of the meeting.
I think it makes sense to do it at the end of the trespass section, because if we're talking about next steps, I think.
I don't think we can do that. We've got somebody coming. We've got a guest who's scheduled, and she could use a lot more time than we've been able to give her. So
We also have bylaws, which
right, we do.
But-
restrict us.
But last time we did
Which
do
is
that.
probably a mistake.
Yeah.
Under our bylaws, yeah.
I think at the end of the meeting is going to be when we have to do it.
But then that means we make decisions without being able to listen to any feedback.
Well, we're going to. I'm sorry, we can't take comments from the audience on this. I don't think our decisions are going to be of the sort that need, where you'd expect comment, public comment. We're not going to make,
We're not gonna make any decisions?
we will make some decisions, but they're going to be process rather than content.
Do you think it's possible to, given that public comment was so short and that I think people might not have understood how this was structured, do you think it's possible to open up public comment, the initial public comment now, to allow for people to speak now at least, if they decide that they want to speak now instead of at the end of our meeting? Do you see what I'm saying?
If there are people who want to speak now, they should have signed up. I did ask many times.
Yes, but I don't know that it was as clear, because
Okay.
there's given that there's trespass section, and given what we did last time, I
Okay,
don't
we've
know
got
that that
15
was
more
understood.
minutes, and who would like to speak? Only one person? We can give you 5 minutes. And you are Sam, right?
I've been trying to go to police board meetings when I can. I think I've seen some of you there, so thank everyone who's attended any police board meetings for your valuable work, whether you're on the commission and can have special speaking rights at some of the meetings, or if you're not, where it's pretty free-flowing, so everyone gets to speak whenever they want, basically. It's a kind of fun atmosphere. Someone corrected me, and I'm confused, because like, several of you introduced yourselves, and one person who's sitting up there, and like, we're all back here, and you're all up there, and one person came in late and did not introduce themselves, and does not have a name tag, so I'm kind of confused as to what's going on. But you can respond when my time's done. And then, so the people, like, can I ask a quick question of the chair?
What?
I can't ask you a question? You shook your head?
Just present, please.
Okay, if I can't ask the chair a question, I'll stop talking.
Okay.
I'll defer to the chair.
What kind of a question was it? I mean, you can ask. I don't want to, our bylaws say that we don't talk until at the end, when people ask, we have questions. Okay? Well, it looks like we're at the end of public comment. Do you have any questions for the speakers?
I would appreciate some more clarity. If you can, were you speaking of some specific incidents? Because I do know, see, I don't read, what is our newspaper? I don't read it. And so I may very well have missed something, and I would greatly appreciate it if you would help me.
So I don't need the mic, I'll just quickly, it's not one specific incident, it's many incidents over the last like couple of months. It's really accelerated like since the year started, even more so the last couple of months since the ICE situation started. So I can email your email about specific incidents, but it's really tackling the issue as a whole that I'm talking about.
If you would do that for me, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I will do so.
Thank you.
Okay.
That would be very helpful. In fact, if you
Okay.
email the email that I sent you, I will make sure everybody sees it. Thank you. Any other questions for our speaker? Thank you. Next thing on our agenda is trespass.
Do we want to do the agenda in minutes?
I'm sorry, thank you. The agenda, we'll go back to the agenda. You raised an issue. Did anybody else want to discuss that issue?
I think it also might make sense to move the progress to date to be the first one, to give context for everything and why we're discussing trespass like we did last meeting, because obviously all of us have been here and know what we've been doing with trespass, but especially for people who haven't been here and haven't been watching, each of our meetings religiously, I think that it would make sense to give a timeline, explain what's happened over time and what we're considering right now.
Okay. Does that sound reasonable to people? Any other changes that you'd like to see made? Can we have a motion to accept?
I move to adopt the agenda with the suggestion, with Vivian's suggestion
Okay.
to move the progress to date up to the top of the trespass section.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. The review of where we are on the trespass. When the Blake incident took place in September, it wasn't clear that there was going to be a police oversight commission. It wasn't clear that there was no task force. No one knew exactly where we were going to go with that. And people came to us and they wanted us to, they at least wanted to talk about it and air their opinions in our public comments. And they asked us to look into it. And we were very concerned as well. So we said yes. We had no power to influence what happened in the particular case. The Human Rights Commission doesn't get involved in cases that are under, that are active cases. But we did talk. We had the chief of police come here. We did ask a lot of questions. We did get some clarification on what he said happened there and what trespass meant and when it was applicable and when it wasn't and what they thought about it. And we had lots and lots of questions. And we also talked to other city leaders. We've talked to the present chief of police, the deputy chief, city leaders, citizens, people, some of the people who were involved. We investigated just enough to know that there was more of an issue than we would be able to handle given the access that we have and the fact that the HRC is not a duly authorized police oversight board, and that board that we are trying to establish will have access that we do not have. And that's a very important point for something like this, so that we could mainly talk but not do actual investigation. But we did gather a lot of information, and we did see some things that were human rights issues, not police practice issues, that we felt we could deal with. And the last thing that was done with that, and in fact, we just, we talked to Chief Fannis. We had him here. We talked to the deputy chief. We've come up with some things that we think will make a dent in the problem. Not solve it altogether. We don't want to preempt the kind of work that the oversight board will be able to do, and we've went to an awful lot of trouble to help get this thing up and running, and want to make sure it's a success. So we don't want to get involved that far into it. What we've done so far is to come up with a summary of all the things we know, because at the last meeting, people were talking about how we've done an awful lot of work. We don't want to waste it. We want to give the board a head start on this process. Let's all get on the same page. So I wrote something, and I will make a proposal about that once we hear some more and we get to the end of this. We also came up with some things we could recommend to the chief of police. At least something that we could send to legal to help us get some ideas how to finish it off. So we have some recommendations that we would like to offer. That's a start. We're very anxious to also hear from our guest speaker. And Vivian, you might want to introduce her. Is there anything else you want to add to that overview?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we never, that in the beginning, we did make inquiries from the police department, and we did send questions to the police department
Right.
that weren't answered until after internal investigation was over. And at that point was about early November when we heard back from the police department.
Right.
I don't believe that I don't remember Police Chief Baird actually being here. We did receive a response from Police Chief Baird.
That's true,
But I
but-
think Howard Lazarus was the one responding to many of the questions.
Right.
And I think we still had a lot of questions following that meeting. And then this spring, we met with one of the assistant city attorneys to talk about trespass in the forum and some specific questions more. And then interim police chief Fanis also came at one point to give sort of an informational overview of what trespass means, what's the difference between informational trespass / being red trespass and criminal trespass.
Right.
And he spoke to us then, and we asked a few questions, I think, and we may or may not still be waiting back on some of those
I
things.
talked to him today, and he is swamped, but he is willing to talk to us about that, or to give us the information that we've asked for. We've asked for some more statistics, and we asked for policy, and
Yeah, and so
Hopefully we'll
some of
get
the,
those.
yeah, and some of the statistics that we've gotten are that trespass is being read in Ann Arbor like hundreds of times a year, and we don't really have any data as to we don't have any demographic data as to who trespass is being read against, and apparently there's some double counting in the data too. So of the 300, like for example, all 300 could be one person. They don't really separate by
some people do it multiple times.
yeah, and so it's not separated by individuals, and apparently demographic data could be collected, and we have numbers as to how many white males are red trespass, but no other data as to any other group by either sex or by either gender or race. And we have seen the trespass form, what's presented to people who are red trespass. And we have also been told, for example, that when someone is red trespass, that's something that they need to talk to the individual property owner about, and that the police, what the police do is they read trespass for 1 year. So, and 1 year was apparently a maximum that was set by the courts. So the court said that when you read someone trespass, you can at most ban them from coming back for a year. And because the max was a year, in order to be fair across the board, the trespass form only says a year and doesn't allow for a lower time amount to be imposed. And so those were a lot of the things that we focused on, and we've been looking at the form specifically in ways to maybe improve the form and improve access to education so that people understood what happens when they're being red trespassed. Because when they're being red trespassed, especially in a private situation, if you're in a restaurant and you're red trespassed, technically your appellate rights lie with that private property owner and not with the city, even though the city is the one reading you trespass. And so I think right now we're recognizing a lot of things are unclear and people might not understand what their rights are or who their concerns should be directed to. And so we've gathered a lot of information from city officials about how trespass is enforced and what it looks like to them when they enforce it. And I think today, one of the things we are interested in hearing more about is what it looks like on the other side and what we could do to help make the process more equitable and more accessible and more transparent.
Right.
And to that end, we've asked the mother of the Blake Transit incident, of the child who was red trespassed during the Blake Transit incident, to come speak to us. And so, if you'd like to come up, we'd love to hear from you at this point, Tria.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
I'm just coming to clear up some misconceptions of my son and myself, and to also kind of discuss the situation, because I don't know how far you guys have went into the situation. I understand the police chief and everybody else has talked to you guys. But I personally went to the Blake Transit Center headquarters. I watched the video. The video has no audio. I'm not understanding why there's audio and visual on the bus, but there's no audio and visual at the Blake Transit Center within itself. To me, that's kind of suspicious, but hey. And then also, when you're watching the video, I don't know if any of you have an opportunity to watch the video, but if you watch the video and you compare the video to the police report, it contradicts itself in every aspect that there is. The detective that was doing the investigation came to my house because he wanted to speak with me. He had an appointment to speak with another young man and his father the day he came to my home. And he's just like, I need you to come. Well, I didn't even know you were coming to my home. I need a moment to make sure I have a babysitter so that I can bring my son down there. Like, I've never tried to shield my son from speaking to anyone. I've never tried to shield myself from speaking to anyone. But you just can't come to my house and demand I come down to the police station and talk to you because you wear a badge and you wear a blue suit. Like, to me, that you're an average citizen still. So it's kind of intimidating, but I don't scare easy. So with that being said, he looked around my house and he's like, well, I see shoes. Well, you come in the middle of the day. My son's at school. Why would you come to my home right now, especially coming unannounced? So he's like, well, it doesn't make a difference whether you come and speak with me or not. We've already come to our conclusion. We know what we're going to do. So at this point, it's up to you. So at that point, my thought was, what's the purpose of me coming to sit down and speak with any of you when you've already come to your conclusion? How do you have a detective who works with a police officer firsthand investigate a situation? They're biased. All of them are biased. I just watched 3 police officers manhandle a woman on Ann Street just before I came here. They're all biased. What they just did to that woman was ridiculous. And then to have 2 more police officers come up on one woman. She was not resisting. She was not being belligerent. She was actually putting her hands behind her back. But the way they jerked her around and was grabbing her body parts, that was ridiculous. So this is what we deal with. My son, he was written a trespass. Like I said, I spoke with the people at the Blake Transit Center. And my son's 16. By state law, like city council, the police officers, human rights, everybody should be abreast to what state law is. My son was 16 at the time. How do you write a 16-year-old a trespass and give it to him? That's against the law. You can't trespass my son from the transit center because you didn't give it to his parent. His parent has to sign it. The people at the Blake Transit Center didn't even know what the proper steps were. You hire these people to sit down at the Blake Transit Center to do work for you people, but you don't even know the proper procedures yourself. So I feel like everybody across the board is completely ignorant to what the law is. The lawmakers, the police, just all of them, they're ignorant. And he's like, well, you can sign this piece of paper. You can have your son sign this piece of paper that says he won't do anything negative and we'll just revoke the trespass. The trespass is revoked because he was 16. He was still riding the bus. He was still going to the Blake Transit Center. Still to this day, he rides the bus. He goes to the Blake Transit Center, and the same particular officer is there periodically. He eyes my son. He makes smart comments to my son. For what? For what? What are you trying to prove? You're trying to antagonize the situation to create a bigger situation. And I feel like that's wrong. And then it's misconceptions of the fact that I say that I just wanted the situation to be swept underneath the rug. That's not the exact words that were brought to me, but that's not true. I feel like the officer should have his badge taken away from him. When you're dealing with people, you need to understand, and you also need to have more of common sense when reading body language and cues. My son is mentally, cognitively impaired. Yes, he does look like a normal child, but when you approach him, if you're talking too many words to him, he doesn't understand that. For you to walk up behind him and grab him from behind, the tape clearly showed it. He wasn't doing anything. For you to grab him from behind and he jerks away, you put all over the news that it could be potentially charged with resisting arrest. How? He didn't resist. Why would you blast him like that? I still want the officer's badge taken away from him. I don't think he should be able to be a police officer in the Ann Arbor Police Department. I don't feel like suspension is enough because, like I said, he's still antagonizing not just my son, but other children at the Blake Transit Center. So he just feels like because he has a badge, he could do what he want to do. That's not fair. we are all citizens. And with that being said, what if I went down there and did what I wanted to do? Everybody would feel like I'm wrong as his parent. I don't see how I would be, though. And then it's a misconception of, oh, she just wants money or this, that, and the other. In all reality, if I really wanted money, I wouldn't be begging from the community. I would have actually obtained a real lawyer, and I would have broke the city if that's what I wanted to do. I have documentation of my son's mental condition. I have the proper documentation. I still have the police report. The police report within itself, I wouldn't even have to talk. Neither would have my son. When you compare the police report to the videotape, that right there would have settled my case. The city wouldn't have wanted to fight that. I don't care how much Lazarus says. I don't care how much the police chief says. They're all full of dog poo, if you ask me. It's senseless. And the day the incident happened, once it went viral, Figer himself came to my home, and he sat down and he spoke with me. He took the case. The only thing that stopped him from breaking Ann Arbor was the fact that my son refused to go to the hospital and that my son refused to go get psychiatric treatment. Still to this day, my son wakes up with nightmares. My son hates the police. My son goes through so much torment because he was blasted all over the news. So we can't even go in the grocery store in peace. We can't go to the mall in peace. We can't walk downtown in peace. I'm in the store without him with his little sister, and they're like, oh, you're the mom of the little boy that was on the news acting a fool at the transit center. Anybody who knows my son knows that my son, he's not perfect, but he doesn't walk the streets just blatantly being disrespectful to adults. He doesn't walk the streets to set out to be an a-hole for no reason. I didn't raise him like that, nor am I raising his other 5 siblings like that. I don't conduct myself like that. So for all of these different conceptions that's going around about myself and my son, I'm just here to clear it up, because what I feel we're entitled to, we're not being given. And my son is entitled to apology from the city, and he's entitled to see that officer face some type of consequence for what was done to him, because it was wrongfully done to him. For him to be slammed on the ground like that, for him to be treated like an animal, for what? Because he was standing there? The officer admitted to me, I spoke with him the day it happened. He admitted, your son wasn't doing anything. He was in a crowd of individuals that were yelling, F the police. So how did you single out my son out of the individuals that were really creating the problem? Because he was the closest one to me to grab at the time. What type of shenanigan mess is that? So because my son was the closest to you to grab at the time, and me and his mother, you're standing here telling me this, what if I grabbed your face? Because you're the closest one to me that did this to my son at the time. Would I have been wrong? They would have locked me up as an average citizen. So how does this man be able to put his hands on my son and not face any type of consequence? And everybody's like, oh, that's Officer Merle. He's been working for the city forever. Who cares? I don't care how many years you have. That doesn't mean that you walk on water and that you're right. You're not. He's a horrible police officer. He's not the only horrible police officer that's down there. And then he laughed about it in my face like it was funny. What was funny about that? That was an insult. Clearly, as his mother, as a citizen, that was an insult. I pay taxes. I'm paying taxes for this. I need a reimbursement. That's what I need. It makes no sense. And then for everybody, I came to the city council meeting. Some city council members, oh, I want to talk to you. Some Human Rights Commission people, oh, I want to talk to you. I still haven't heard from anyone. But everybody has conceptions that they're spewing out of their mouths about my son and myself, but no one has reached out. And the ones that have, I'm not going to verbally speak upon who they are, but there are some that have. But if anyone really cared, they would have reached out to the actual source and they would have dug into the situation. Why would you turn to the police to explain to you a situation where you could clearly see something was wrong? Do you think they're going to actually tell you the truth? I doubt it. They're just like doctors. They take an oath. They protect each other. They're not going to throw each other under the bus. For what?
How about some questions? Do we have questions?
Yeah, I do have a few questions. So in speaking to several of the city officials, we've been told, or at least I recall us having been told, that trespass isn't current on your son, that it got revoked, or that something happened, or that there currently isn't trespass
They claim
against
they
him.
revoked it, but when
But
I
they
sat
did
down and
tell you about
spoke
that?
with them, it was nothing to revoke because the trespass wasn't even legal anyway.
Okay.
You gave him a document, but it wasn't a legal binding document because you didn't give it to myself.
When did they contact you to say that it had been revoked?
That was in October.
In October, okay. Was it the police who contacted you? Was it Blake Transit Center?
It was the Blake Transit Center. It's
Okay.
when I sat down and had a meeting with them. When they showed me this videotape, they were so excited, because they were going to show me this videotape about my son acting a clear imbecile, but in all reality,
Yeah.
he was just standing there like the rest of the children.
And they only agreed to revoke it after you signed something?
Correct.
Okay, and was that the first time that the Blake Transit Center called you or contacted you?
Correct. I reached out to them from the day the situation happened up until the middle of October before anyone even contacted me.
Did anyone, the officer, for example, did anyone ever tell you that you'd have to work with Blake Transit Center to get this resolved instead of the police or the city?
No.
Okay.
I wanted to work with Blake Transit Center because I wanted to see the tape. They kept saying, the Officer Morrow kept saying, the tape will show you. The tape will show you. You'll be able to hear. You'll be able to see. But the tape didn't show me anything. But individuals just standing there. The tape showed me my son standing there. The tape showed me you walking up and harassing my son from behind. Any one of you, if somebody walks up to you and touches you from your behind, your first instinct is to kind of jerk away or move and turn around and be like, what are you touching me for? Especially if you don't know this person. He wasn't doing anything any different than any other average citizen would do.
Was Kaim given a form, like a written form about trespass from the city when?
He was just given a trespass form that said he couldn't ride the bus for a year.
Okay.
Is it a trespass notice? Yeah. Okay. Fill in the blank.
Did the police, do you know if, I know you weren't there, but do you know, in talking to Kaim, do you know if the police officer read it to him and explained what any of that meant?
No, he was too busy talking about how he was from, I guess he said Baltimore, and he's seeing people that are really harder than what these young teens portray themselves to be. And this is what the man expressed to me as well. This was a conversation he had with my son, sitting in the little room in the transit center. Are you trying to intimidate him with your words? Who cares if you're from Baltimore? You're no different than anybody else. Just because you're from Baltimore, you could be punched in your face and you could be knocked out too. I don't care what city or state you're from. That doesn't make you immune. And I swear Detroit is a little bit more lethal than Baltimore. So are you proud to say you're from Baltimore and you came to Ann Arbor? You must have been one of those ones that was teased as a child or bullied to become a police officer to bully other people. That's the perspective that I get off of him. He's a punk.
Yeah. I've heard that other youths from the same incident were also read trespass. Do you know if anything differently happened in those cases? If they were treated any differently, or?
No, they weren't treated any differently. One of the young men were actually followed down the street. That's how they ended up arresting him, because he walked away. And they followed the young man down the street, antagonizing him until the young man got so fed up he exploded. So they arrested him. And his parents had to come pick him up because he was only 15 or 16, something like that. And I said, well, how did that happen when my son's only 16? Officer Merrill said, excuse me? I said, didn't you ask him his date of birth to write it on the trespass? He said, yeah. I said, well, obviously you can't count. He said, what do you mean? I said, my son's birth date is 12/2/2000. Yes, we are in 17, but we're in September, stupid. He was like, oh, I didn't know. Wow. I'm really scared now. Like, if you could mess up on something so simple as that, I'm scared. And I'm like, where's my son? I don't know. I released him. How did you release him? And he's a minor. Everybody knows the legal limit in Michigan is 17 to be talked to as an adult. So how did you even have a conversation with my son? Other than, what's your name and what's your mother's telephone number? That's all you were supposed to say. You weren't supposed to say anything else to him. But you were too busy portraying yourself to be this hardcore individual because you're from Baltimore. That's why you couldn't take the time to actually focus. All of the young people that he wrote the trespass to were under 17. So,
did you? Was it ever explained to you or your son the difference between the trespass that he was read and like criminal trespass? Like
I
what the
explained it
penalties
to him
were?
because we know the difference.
Okay.
Like, I'm very abreast when it comes to the law.
But did they try, but like without knowing you, they wouldn't know that you knew that? Like
No,
did they
they
try
didn't.
to explain?
No, they didn't.
anything?
Nothing.
No one explained.
Excuse me?
You said no one explained?
No one.
You mentioned, did I hear you say that you had to sign something in order to get the trespass revoked?
That's what they were asking for. And my son signed it. I said, he was like, Mom, I don't want to sign it. I said, just sign it. Who cares?
What was it that he
It was just a paper stating that he would conduct himself properly while at the Blake Transit Center and riding the city bus.
Oh.
Just like a permission slip you would sign for your child to ride the school bus.
Did they say what would be the consequence if they think that he doesn't?
No. They were too busy being combative because I was asking questions about
Yeah.
their poor quality of recording that they had.
So like sign this, but if we decide that your son's no longer complying, who knows what happens? We get to decide.
Basically. Which really didn't matter to me because the trespass wasn't even legal anyway. So I'll do what I need to do to appease you people because you still look stupid.
Did you receive a copy of the form that your son signed?
No, but I sat there and I read it.
So no copy was given to your son of the paper that he was requested to sign?
They actually faxed it to the Nutrizone, to Lori. He signed it while I was there, and Lori faxed it back to them.
Oh.
So there is a separate copy
It is a
of
separate
that
copy,
form,
but one was not mailed to me.
and he wasn't given one at the time?
No.
Was it like was it like a long form?
No, it
or
was
like
just a generic form.
Yeah.
And the
Do's
form
and
came-
don'ts of how you conduct yourself at the transit center.
So the form came from the Blake Transit Center? But the trespass that was originally
Was given from the police
was from the
department.
police? You mentioned earlier the detective who came to your home unannounced and without any prior knowledge, and there seemed to be, for my purpose, I just want clarity. I wasn't sure in that particular instance when the officer stated that they had already concluded the outcome of, I guess, the incident. So did you accompany him or no?
No.
You did not?
It didn't make any sense to
No,
me.
and I
Why?
understand. I just wasn't clear if you did accompany him and then, the comment was made, well, we've already.
Well, in the police reports, it states that they talked to all parties, but they never interviewed my son and myself. So that's another contradictory portion that's in the police report. Like if they run the cameras, they would never see me and my son walking in there. But if you run the cameras in my community, you'll see the man come into my front door, and you'll see the man leaving out of my front door.
But he never spoke to Kaim, correct?
Never,
Even to date?
never.
I know that you may not know the answer to this question, but the children who were read trespass, were they all males?
Yes, and they were all African Americans. But they were in a group that was diverse, but only 3 African Americans were picked out of the group.
I understand that the police were first made aware of an incident there because two
It was a
girls were
fight.
fighting.
It was a fight between 2 girls.
Did anything
That had
happen?
nothing to do with my son.
Did
My
anything
son,
happen to the girls?
I don't know exactly what happened to the girls because that was a long, drawn-out situation that carried from the transit center to both the schools the girls had went to. So that ongoing situation was a complete mess, but I don't know the outcome of that. What I do know is those girls were still able to ride the bus. They weren't written to trespass when they fought at the transit center twice that week. And not only did they fight, they jumped one of the girls and beat her pretty bad. And they were not arrested. They were not handcuffed. They were set free. In all reality, the day the last fight happened at the transit center, those girls actually got on the bus and they left. He was too busy focusing he was too busy focusing on the crowd versus focusing on the reason why they were called to be there, that these individuals were able to leave. How is that so? That you're zoned in on these group of males, but you're not zoned in on the reason why you were there.
From the time of the incident until your son was asked to sign, I'll call it a release, what time frame are we talking about?
It was over a month.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, was the fight between African American girls?
It was a group of African American girls. It was more than 12 of them.
There were what?
It was more than 12 of them
Wow.
that were fighting. So I'm not understanding how none of those 12 individuals walked away unscathed, but these 3 young black boys got caught up.
And there was a crowd of boys, and only 3 were chosen.
It was crowds all around. You could see in the camera that it was just cluster of individuals. And the officer stated that he asked them to move away from the area. I said, well, where did you ask them to move to? He said, I just asked them to move. So with no clear direction of telling them where to move to, they just moved out of the way. You didn't say go across the street. You didn't say get away from the Blake Transit Center. You said move away from the area. So if you guys were to tell me to move away from the area, I would just step over there, or I will go back to my seat. But I'm still in the area. You have to be specific.
So did they ever fully explain like what police order your son was disobeying?
No. Oh, he said that he was being dismissive. He said that he was being insubordinate because he asked my son for his name. My son told him what his name was. He asked my son for a school ID. My son explained to him that he didn't have a school ID because at the time his school did not give IDs yet. He said he didn't believe him because all the rest of the schools had given school IDs. But my son goes to what I call the throwaway school of the district that nobody cares about, that Ann Arbor is just feeding their money into. They didn't get school IDs till like November, early December. So he actually did not have one. And yes, him being 16, potentially I should have taken him to get a Michigan ID, but it's not legally required, so I don't have to.
Did the officer say that because he didn't hand over his ID, that was the order he disobeyed?
That too. And I said he doesn't have one. He said, oh, I thought he was just BSing, but he said the full word, like all the rest of the children.
Okay.
I said, no, he's telling the truth.
And then after you told him that, did the officer explain what other order?
Being insubordinate.
Mm-hmm. So the officer ordered your son to not be insubordinate, and he was insubordinate, and that was the
That was
legal
his
order?
reasoning.
Okay.
And then when he walked up to him from behind and he grabbed him, he considered that to be resisting. I said, how is that resisting? Resisting arrest is to actually be physical or trying to run, which turns into fleeing. He said, oh. I said, yeah, you're not dealing with a dummy. And he just looked at me. I know the difference. So now you're saying that he resisted arrest, and he's like, yeah, your son could potentially be facing a felony. I said, how? He said, for resisting. I said, well, did he hit you? He said, no. I said, well, in the video that I was shown, it didn't seem like he was resisting. I was only shown a piece of the clip. I wasn't shown all of it. And I specifically asked him, I said, I was told that the first story was he yanked him off the bus, body slammed him. He said that wasn't true. Then I was told he put a gun on him. He said that wasn't true. Then I was told he put a taser out on him. He said that wasn't true. But if you look at the video, you did. And what did you have to do that for? Because you have individuals standing around you? Why? Like, I was just standing around the woman that they were arresting, and they didn't pay me any attention. You were trying to make a statement when you did what you did to my son. That's my view.
Any other questions?
When did you have the conversation with the officer involved?
The same day it happened. I had just got off from work and I got the phone calls. Like, these teenagers kept calling me. And so something answered. I answered because something told me, just answer the phone. And I immediately packed my children up And I went to the transit center. And they're like, oh, well, if your son was participating in that incident, he's down the street in the jail. So I went to the jail, and I was looking for my son. I couldn't get in. So I went back to the transit center, and they were like, well, what's your son's name? And I told them. He was like, oh, I released him. Morrow himself said, oh, I released him. How? He's only 16. He was like, no, he's not. Yes, he is, dum-dum. How? The other boy was 16, too. How did you release him? He was like, oh, yeah, dummy.
Since that conversation and to date, have you had any communication with that officer?
No, but I've seen him, and he just rolls his eyes at me.
No apology, no?
None whatsoever.
So in the
I do want to have a conversation with him because it's a particular part inside of the police report where him and I had a conversation. He put in, some of the words were fabricated, but he didn't put anything as to, it was just like I was volunteering information to him. He didn't put nowhere in the police report how the conversation started and the questions that were asked of me, because it's not the first time Morrow has seen my son, per his words. It's not the first time he's talked to my son, per his words. And I asked him, what happened? And he was like, nothing. He's just down here with the wrong crowd. We all hang with people that folks don't like. So because he's with individuals that you don't like, this is what you do to him? I don't like police officers. So since you're a police officer, what if I just grabbed you? What if I just threw you to the ground? Because I don't like police officers. Would that be right? And I'm pretty sure I would have faced some type of consequence by now. So why hasn't this individual? And everybody talks about how they're just so disappointed and how they're just so working to try to come up with a conclusion, but nobody's doing anything but myself. And it's just like, I have this whole city behind me, but this whole city is doing nothing. Lazarus himself. Oh, I'm going to speak with you. I want to do something about the situation. Lazarus is a crock of BS, in my opinion.
Did you ask for a copy of the tape from the Blake Transit?
They told me they could not give it to me because it would be too difficult to copy and paste my son because it's so many different individuals in the video. I said, well, I already seen a big portion of the video with the children. I know all the children. Well, you would have to get consent forms from their parents. So there's no type of way you could give me anything? No.
Okay.
I said, okay, thank you.
Did you ask for and or receive a copy of the actual police report?
Yes, I did. And I actually passed out copies of the police report at the city council meeting that I came to. I think it was in November. And everybody's like, oh, we'll read it and we'll get back with you. Nothing.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us. I think that's helped very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've heard a lot of things that we should document in the summary that is out there. And I want to ask you about the summary. I wrote it originally just to make sure that, to have somewhere documented what we know about trespass. And we can't do, we really can't, we can't take up the issue of the way the police have acted, but we can take up the process of trespass. We can take up the form and the way human rights were or were not violated, having to do with just the trespass itself. But we certainly can document what we've heard today. Is this something that you want to do anything with this summary of the trespass summary that I wrote? Do you want to check? Do you want to send it to anybody else at this point for accuracy, or do you want to just keep updating it as we?
I guess, so is this for our internal benefit primarily? Is this something that we're preparing for educational reasons that we can hand out to property owners? Or?
That's what I'm asking you.
Okay.
I started, it's certainly for internal, but I can imagine that there are other uses for it.
Yeah, I think that I think that coming up with an educational document would be really important. I think that, I know some organizers who have been trying to collate all this information, and I think it's nice. I think that something that has been brought up a few times at some of the police task force meetings, though, is that it's often nice to have plain English translations of some of these documents, so that, you know, kids or people who have developmental challenges, or people for whom like English isn't their first language, can read it and get a basic understanding in ways that are maybe more accessible to. So like I like the idea of coming up with something educational, and something that I think we could give to like businesses to like let them know what trespass is, or maybe work with them to try to reduce numbers of like them wanting to call trespass or needing to call trespass. But I think if the idea is also to like help educate the population that is trespassed, we might want to come up with like accessible language for that as well.
Now that is something we certainly could do, or other people could do. And one of the things I want is a reading from us about how much we want to get into this. I mean, but we certainly don't want to waste this work that we're all doing. So we will pass it on if we decide not to be the ones who do it.
Yes,
but we could be.
There are a number of people who think that next to nothing has been done about this case.
Yes.
Which is, as we know, off-center. We've got a 6-page draft of what has been done, right, which passes my test as more than nothing. But we haven't released it.
Right.
And therefore, if the only eyes that see it are those of us, and the chances that we will be read trespass are not high, we need to release something.
Given that this might be construed as like legal advice, like has the city attorney indicated that we are allowed to do this, that we are not allowed to do this?
The first person I would like to see this is legal. First of all, to check the accuracy. I mean, first I'd like us to go through it and check if we think we know that if this is what we believe or that we've heard. Then I would like to send it by legal, and maybe I don't know, maybe just legal, or maybe the chief police, I don't know, you have to decide. And then I think it's time to think about sending it to other people. I just want to know what it's going to be used for, and let's start doing it.
It was my assumption, and maybe, I guess I'm now being corrected, that we were going to each look at this, make any comments, come to some consensus about what it should say, run it by legal, and then I thought pass it, maybe make it publicly available, but also pass it on to the Oversight Commission.
That too.
Because they're the ones who really will be empowered to handle this in a meaningful way. We are not. We really are, you know, I see our role as being constrained in that we can add something to the form having to do with this can't be used in a discriminatory way. Beyond that, I think it really is, and we can add the things, our recommendations that the city might want to consider now, that the Police Oversight Commission we think should take up. But I think that should be the end of it for us.
Okay.
You know, that's how I view it.
So
yeah, I think that makes sense, because the Police Oversight Board is not only tasked, eventually when it comes about, it's not just tasked to do incidents review, right? It's going to be looking at policy, forms, practices, and that's going to be some of the routine work they'll be doing. And I think if we do the initial research and give it to them, and then they can probably carry the baton from there to make sure how we are going to reform this process and deal with it, so.
Yeah, I do think though that given that we've met with so many people, we met with past police chief, we've met with the interim police chief, we've met with the interim deputy police chief, and like the city attorney, Howard Lazarus, like we'll speak to legal about this. That's a lot of people, right? And so we've done a lot of the legwork. I think in speaking to members of the community, I think that there is like people do want to know more about this. People aren't familiar with what this is. I've talked to a lot of people who are, like attorneys, like pretty savvy individuals, like even criminal attorneys, who weren't aware what being read trespass meant in the first place. Like, I don't think it's an issue that people know very much about.
So-
And I think it's an issue that, a lot of these like targeted populations could deal to like learn more about. I think, everyone should know more about trespass, and we've done a lot of the informational stuff.
It does
And we could-
happen 332 times a year on the average.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I think like it was implied that it's the same people rotating in and out, and they already know their rights, and so there's no need to educate anyone, but I don't think that's necessarily true. Like, even if that were the case, I think there's some indication that those people who may be cycling in and out don't understand what's happening. Because if they're just given a form that they can't read and don't understand, and nothing's ever explained to them, like it was, like I am also an attorney. It was really hard for me to understand what the difference is between all these terms. There's being read trespass, there's informational trespass, there's criminal trespass. Like, are these all the same thing? Are they two different things? Like, how do they interact with them? Like, what are the penalties for one versus the other, right? And I think that, a lot of that is like really not transparent, and like we can. Like, I don't know that, like, it makes sense to necessarily, so I guess I agree maybe that the task force might be the best, the police review board might be the best one to actually agitate for reform, but that, sorry. Okay, but I think that, like, it's worthwhile, like, pointing out a few holes. And also, like, maybe, I think pointing out a few holes and, like, making sure people are aware that appellate rights lie with the private property owners instead of with the city, and that they can contact them, and that also the max is a year. So maybe even if they contact property owners, maybe they can negotiate for something much lower.
Right.
Things like that, things that people can do to.
So there are some things people can do.
Well,
People
unless,
can do to
Well,
advocate for themselves. And I think also, for example, like, that form is pretty confusing. It doesn't really explain much. And I think that, like, if we prepared a form, like, maybe we could even include, if we prepared some educational material, we could even say, like, if this is not available in, like, your language, or if this is, like, you don't understand, like, what this means, like, maybe you can contact, like, someone in the city or someone in the police department or one of us to, like, arrange for translation or arrange for, like, some resources that way. Because I think that there are needs that aren't being served, and we have a lot of the information that can answer some of these questions.
I think,
did you?
Yeah.
I'm sitting back here listening, and it's like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound anal, but it's a lot of commentary going on about trespass forms and what trespass really means. My question I have is, how can anyone be working for the city or doing anything for the city and they don't know what trespass means? How can you contract someone to work for you and you don't know what trespass means? How can you contract someone to work for you and you're not overseeing them? And how can you have a trespass form that is not a real document that has like different languages on there and something to break down what it really means? Like, this is something that should have already been taken care of. When the Blake Transit Center came up with their conclusion that they wanted to contract with working with the Ann Arbor Police Department to have them there to take care of situations, this is something that should have been worked out before. This is something that should still be pegging away almost a year later to get done. Like, to me, this is a waste of time when something could be on the agenda for something else different. Like, we have major issues that's going on. But instead, people are still pegging away to come up with a proper trespass form. This is crazy.
Well, I'm thinking also that Vivian, I agree with you. I think that the form, which is, by the way, the form drives the process, so so it's not just a form. But that's a place we can educate. There are a number of things we can do. We also could look at the agreement that businesses sign when they make people agents.
So why hasn't it been done already? Like, why? I'm not being funny, but like, why Is this something that you guys
No,
handle?
No.
but we can solve the problem. We don't know what
We don't-
caused it,
yeah.
and we
You
don't want
said
to
you
go
could
there. We
solve
don't want
the-
to go there.
I said you said you could solve the problem?
Well, we're working, we're trying to figure that out.
So
That's what
what's
we're
taking
doing
so
now.
long? The problem
Well,
could have been
that's why
solved.
we're talking,
Yeah.
right
So
here.
I think we definitely agree with you that like there needs
Yes.
to be more education.
Yes.
Like there are a lot of things about what happened to your son that just weren't explained. If someone
Right.
else didn't have like a parent who was as good of an advocate as you or as savvy about their rights as you, like they would have been like in a much worse place, right? And I think I want people like your son and like a lot of teenagers out there too, and a lot of the other populations that are trespassed, like know what this means. Because if it's not coming from, if it's not coming when they're being read trespass, they should know of their rights somehow.
But they should. Like, ignorance is a bliss. You get on the internet and you do everything else. You're savvy towards everything else. Why don't you make yourself savvy to what the law is? Like, that's nobody else's, I'm not being funny, but that's nobody else's responsibility
Yeah.
to instill in you what the law is as an adult,
Yeah.
especially as being a parent. That's
I think-
something that you should already be trying to look into, especially when you have young black boys. The minute a parent finds out she's pregnant with a male as a black woman, if she does nothing else, it's the first thing she needs to do. So I guess maybe it should start at the OB-GYN office as well, so some literature can be dropped off there for African American women, so that they could kind of, like while they're Facebooking and Instagramming and Snapchatting, the same way you do that, get your lazy butt up and figure out what the law is.
And I definitely understand where you're coming from. I think we want to like make sure that there is a safety net for people who aren't like as well informed with their rights. Because I don't think that this should.
We didn't establish reading trespass.
No.
It was brought to our attention primarily by this case. And we've been working on it to try to clarify it and help educate people. But we didn't establish it.
Okay.
So,
Well, I know you guys didn't, but I'm just trying to figure out, your name's Leslie, correct? She said that, like, this is something that's being worked on, but I'm just trying to figure out why, like, after all these months later, it's something that's still
I
being
think we're
worked on.
trying to do as much as we can, and like I think education, like educating the community, is one of the things we can do. I think something
What
else.
can I do to help? Because I'm willing to help.
Yeah, and so I
Try to
think that this
educate
has
the
helped a lot
community.
because this has helped us
One of the things you
understand.
can do is proofread what, if we decide to come up with an educational materials, you can look at them and see if that would have helped you at the time.
Yeah, because whatever I can do as a mother, because I have 2 other African American boys that are coming up in this undisclosed racist little town. Hopefully I'll be out of this little racist town, but I'm scared for them. So anything that I can do to help, I'm willing to do that.
We will contact you.
Okay.
Seriously.
Okay.
Seriously. Do you know that we were told that people never appeal trespass? That you may be the first one. And to me, that
Because they're not
says
told
that
that
people, there's nothing on the form that says you can appeal.
Yes, it is.
Not in the form right
No.
now. I think they contacted you, but on the form that Kaim initially gave, it doesn't say anything about who to contact or how you can appeal it.
But you went to check on,
Yeah, I think that just comes with common sense. That's not too common
not
nowadays.
that
So
common.
that's
Right.
something else that I would be willing to work with you guys on to try to help these uncommon sense people use the brain that was given to them.
okay, we have to make a decision. So the decision only
Thank
has
you
to
again.
be that we will,
Well, we also have the question, I think, of, sorry to interrupt, of those changes that we had come up with to the form.
Right.
Which seemed to me would make a huge difference.
that's a big start.
Do we want to agree at least to send them to city attorney's office and have them look it over, and maybe to Mr. Lazarus as a start, and then work on this report so we can come to consensus that it says what we all think we've learned, and then either make it public or do whatever we do with it after
So
that?
to be transparent about this, some of the changes we've asked to make to the form are for the form to be clear that the 1 year isn't necessarily a set time period, and it can go lower than that. For example, like right now, if like a restaurant wanted to kick someone out, they would just be given the form and told that 1 year was like the only option. So the option there is no option for discretion to property owners. And so we'd like
Right.
them to consider that, because 1 year is a weird, arbitrary
Right.
number to just pick for everyone if that's also the maximum. But we wanted to also include like appellate rights, to cite more accurately to a trespass statute, to explain that the trespass charges can't violate the city's non-discrimination ordinance. So if a private property owner like wanted someone out because they were because they were a member of a protected class, then the property owner would be on notice that you can't do that. And then add something about a right to appeal as well, and maybe even add contact information for the Human Rights Commission so that they know that they would have a resource to contact if they had more questions and they didn't know who to speak to. I think a lot of those things make sense, but in speaking to some more community members, Ayala, I think we haven't seen more community members right now for many of the same reasons. We've had trouble in the police task force settings of getting people to come to televised meetings because a lot of people are scared and like don't want to come and speak in a public setting. But I have heard that people don't necessarily think that adding contact information to the Human Rights Commission is helpful because they don't really see the Human Rights Commission as being able to do anything about this. I don't think they should stop us from doing that in case it helps someone.
Right.
But I do think that there's this idea that won't really change anything. That anything we do to the forum might not be really meaningful.
It's a start, I think. And I think one of the things we ought to do is make the changes, get to legal, and make sure that we've got some of the things that we have processes that are not discriminatory and that are legal, and then come back and try them out on people who have been in the situation and see if it really does help, if it really is explanatory, and then maybe go back to the drawing board and add a little bit more.
You know, and I think I've been in contact with some nonprofits in the area that serve some of these communities. Too. And I think there might be an interest in having listening sessions, especially once we have our educational material prepared, and like even something sort of, I guess I wouldn't call it Know Your Rights, but like having educational sessions, educational informational sessions about what is trespass, like what's the difference between educational and criminal trespass, because I think there's an interest in it. I also think that like I've heard that like that there are nonprofits out there who have really tried to deliberately address the issue of trespass and have, with more education, really lowered their rates of being read trespass through more training and more education on when it's appropriate to read trespass, and they've created internal guidelines on like what really requires that sort of police intervention. And they've been really quite successful in lowering their numbers. And so I think that there's a lot we can do in like softer informational sessions to help out and to help the community, both the community and also property owners, like understand like what's appropriate and what is accurate.
Do we have a next step? Can we vote on that?
So I, from my perspective,
I'm sorry. This is not, we don't have a public comments right now.
I'm just going to go ahead and give a public comment real quick. It's just very short. And that's it. Well, I think this is really great. This is a great step. It's downstream of the problem. Trespass is not Ann Arbor's problem. A racist and ableist police force is Ann Arbor's problem. Solving trespass will limit the scope of what that police force can do, but it doesn't solve the problem. You know, a mother just told you that her son is body slammed by the police, and I didn't hear any remorse from anyone here, and I don't really know what to make of that.
Sorry, we've been dealing with this a long time, and so we do understand what's going on. We have to make progress where we can, and I think we can now, and we have to do it right now.
So will you, in your recommendation to the police task force, will you lobby for stronger sticks, so to speak, stronger punishments for police who have a history of racially motivated acts?
That probably goes without saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And just to respond to some of that too, like I think that one of the reasons we're doing what we are now instead of addressing things more broadly is because I think what you're asking for is a more holistic approach, that just addressing the form or just addressing like one aspect of how trespass is read isn't enough, and we need to address the root of the problem. Maybe the racism that motivates people, private property owners to call trespass, maybe racism, internal bias amongst the police themselves. And I think that we've all sort of recognized that the police task force might be the best body to do all of that work because they'll have a broader outreach. Police commission, broader outreach and also like a more singular focus, right? Like they will be capable of doing more of that holistic examination of trespass and also like a consideration of internal bias amongst police than sadly we are able to do.
I hope so.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So I think that in terms of next steps, I'm very comfortable with the recommendations that Vivian just read aloud. Passing those along, even at this point, to, first of all, the city attorney to make sure it passes muster with them. My understanding is that, based on some of the materials that that I read for this evening, that council, is it correct that council is thinking about taking up trespass and amendments to the Ann Arbor trespass ordinance, or is that incorrect? Did I misread?
No, it's an attorney who is thinking about having a local trespass ordinance, but that would be the charge of trespass, the criminal trespass rather than informational.
Okay, that goes to criminal and not informational. Okay. I think we pass along the recommendations. In my view, what we should do is we should pass the recommendations, once we're comfortable with them, along to the city attorney, make sure it passes muster with them. I think that with respect to the memorandum that has been compiled about what we know about trespass, it seems to me that if the city attorney, again, once we're comfortable with that document, is willing to look at that and feel that it is an accurate document, I think we should pass that along to them too. And then the idea would be to pass them both along to whoever the right people are. And the right people might include the city administrator, who oversees the police department. And I don't know what process needs to happen in order for a form to actually be changed. But I think that our recommendations should go to the right place there. And I think the memorandum should be passed along to the ultimate police review board, so that the information that we have gathered is not lost, and then they can take appropriate next steps with there. I agree with Linda that I think, and this goes to a little bit about what people are saying too. We have to be mindful about what the scope of our authority is, and we understand that there are a whole variety of problems and a larger set of problems at issue here. Right. At the moment, we're focusing on this issue. I think the most important recommendation from our standpoint as a Human Rights Commission is to make sure that that form says that you cannot have a discriminatory reason or a reason that violates the non-discrimination ordinance for reading trespass to someone, even in informational, right? That is firmly within the scope of what we do with respect to this particular issue. But I'm comfortable with the other recommendations too. And so that's what I think the next steps should be.
Okay. Can I consider that a proposal?
Sure.
Is that clear enough for everybody else?
Yep.
Can we vote on it?
Yep.
What sort of timeline will we have to comment on the trespass document? Do we want to do this before August or like?
So I guess what I said this, I guess, explicitly. I want to make it more explicit. I think what we should do is we should take the next month to look carefully at those documents, each of us, at the next meeting, in my view, we should look at those documents, make sure that we're comfortable with them. Once we're comfortable with them, then we should pass them along to the city attorney with an eye towards either, I guess by September, making, the August meeting, having it passed along so that hopefully the recommendations then can be passed along soon thereafter. That's,
Yeah,
at least that's what I'm thinking in terms of time.
And I think that would dovetail hopefully well with the start of
I
the
think so.
police
The formation of the board.
board
and-
panel.
Yeah, the police review board.
Give them a lot to do right from the beginning.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a proposal. Do we have a second?
Sure, I'll second. Oh.
Who? Dwight? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Excellent.
Okay.
Leslie, can I just make one other comment? And that is, I'm a firm believer in publishing to the masses. So however we can communicate this to the public so that they are fully aware of what we're doing, I strongly recommend that we do that. We have a Facebook page. Let's put it there.
We do.
don't.
I'm sorry, we don't have a Facebook. We have a website, a webpage, yes.
We could-
So
yes, we could put
any
it there.
and everything that we can do, including to the audience who said, what can I do? Publish it to the masses. Because the only way that we're going to get the word out is for people to know. So I'd like to see us do that and ensure that it is on the agenda for the next meeting so that the public is aware that we are not only looking at this, but that we are going to move forward once we have the approval and that this information is communicated to the public. The significant thing that I heard from our guest, Ms. Moore, about this, that was an eye-opener for me, should have known, didn't, is that it is clearly unlawful to issue trespass to a minor.
Yeah, that is
I mean,
something we'd have to add. I agree.
It begs the question of why we should even have to state that, but the fact remains that clearly we do, and not only us, but our police officers as well. It is, as she rightly stated, our taxes that pay their salaries to protect us. And so I find it reprehensible that we're here discussing something that should just be known, but clearly isn't. So I'd like for us to take the initiative when and wherever we can publish to the masses, whatever it is that we do, in whatever form or venue, that we do that.
Thank you.
So Leslie, one thing I'll just add, one possibility is, once we get this to the point where we're ready to make recommendations, one thing we might consider doing is doing it in the form of a resolution, you know,
Yes.
at that point. That's one way of communicating, you know, here, that we resolve to pass these recommendations forward to, you know, wherever it needs to be passed. I think we have to figure out where that makes the most sense. And then we can, I don't think, once it's all been approved and we've resolved that, there's no reason we couldn't post that on our website, for example.
Right. I think we've got our marching plans. And we have another guest who, and I don't want to take up too much more of her time. I would like to welcome Anna Lemner, who is with One Community. And I'll bet you have PowerPoint and you want to know how to get it. There are some USB ports, and I think you can just put it in and maybe sign on. That's what they've told me. One Community's been on our back burner for some time, and we have had very little information about it, and it is really up and running, I think, and Anna is moving quickly. So I want us to get there before she's got it all solved. Find out how we can help.
You said put it where?
I think underneath, on the side.
Just kidding.
You see it?
Yep.
I think either one of those would work.
Okay.
Something's happening.
I asked CTN and they told me that was all you had to do. I don't know if that's true.
Okay.
Could you help? Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, it popped out. All right.
So it'll come up on the screens here?
Yes, and there should be a remote somewhere
Okay.
over there that we can, or actually on the panel there is that we can
Is
drop
it
the
this?
TVs. That one can do it, and
Cool, I have some printed copies if anyone wants a printed copy.
let's see. Is that you?
Yup. Thank
Perfect.
you.
I can get those screens. Actually, it's on the wall there.
Cool, thank you.
The last time we
Right next
did
to
it,
the
we
remote.
could see it.
Oh, on this wall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What did you do?
Little panel right here.
Thank you.
Welcome. First, we gotta sit there and hold it. And this remote should turn them on.
And wasn't there one we were supposed to be able to see? We see right in front of us. Oh, we do, okay, we see right in front of us. Good, thank you.
There we go.
Thank
You're
you.
You're welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hi there.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, and hello to everyone over here, too. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing with us what you've experienced and what has happened or not happened since then. I both am feeling deeply for you and your family, and also it is definitely in line with what I'm about to present on as it relates to racial equity here in our county. So my name is Anna Lemler, and I'm the Racial Equity Analyst for Washtenaw County. And you all have maybe heard about this, either hopefully the City of Ann Arbor has been a part of this. And so I'm going to be primarily presenting about just primarily from the county lens, but I'd be more than happy to talk a little bit about the city and what that partnership looks like. So One Community is the name of the initiative, and it's about advancing racial equity in Washtenaw County. So what is equity? It's when neither a person's race or address can predict their outcomes of life. So the color of one's skin or their zip code should not determine what kind of life quality someone has. Some ways that racial inequity manifests. This is important that this slide is important to me because often we don't have a similar understanding of what racism means or how it functions. And so here, what you can see in front of you, can you all see okay? Okay. Sure, yes. So what this slide is showing us is that there's two ways that racism can show up. So one of those ways may be explicit versus implicit. And so on the left, that box is showing us is giving us examples on these three different levels. Individual, institutional, and structural are these three different levels of racism. And so examples of how that shows up in either an explicit or implicit way is that, actually before providing the examples, I want to share that this content comes from GARE, which is the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, which has been a consultant that we've been working with. And police officers themselves who are working with GARE to advance racial equity came up with these examples. So historically, we may have seen that institutionally, an explicit racist policy would be that a police department refuses to hire people of color. That used to literally be written in policy. It used to be legal. An implicit institutional example may be that police department focuses on street-level drug arrests. So there's no race, there's no naming of race or color in that, but the impact is still racially disparate. And then on an individual level, examples of explicit or implicit is that a police officer calls someone an ethnic slur while arresting them. So that's pretty explicit, a derogatory term. And then implicitly, an officer may call for backup when arresting a person of color. So that's their implicit bias. It's not in policy, but it is, again, the impact is still that heavier policing is happening for that person of color. So over here is the three levels of racism. One is individual, so that's the kind of one-on-one interpersonal level, which includes prejudgment, bias, or discrimination by an individual based on race. And then institutional racism is all the policies and procedures and practices that benefit white people, and then for people of color, which may be done inadvertently or unintentionally. And structural racism is the history and current reality of all of that. So all of those policies and institutions that create a system that negatively impacts people of color. So these wheels here, over here on the side, are showing us that all of this is connected. So we as individuals make up these institutions, institutions make up the structure and system, and then we are also a part of that. And like you are all saying tonight, you were just talking about your scope, right? Or the ability that you may or may not have. That to me is a good example of how you still have to fit within certain institutional norms and policies, even if you wish you could do more. So we focus on racial equity for two reasons. One is that we see when we are looking at all types of inequities that racism is deep and pervasive and the most prevalent and crosses many categories, which I'll go to momentarily. But the second is that we want to use a policy approach that's called targeted universalism. And so what that means is that we have a universal care and desire that all people have a wonderful high quality of life, but we use a targeted approach. So we choose one of those groups to focus on. Otherwise, research shows us that if we have a broad approach, we don't make impact. So we may think that we may see we want to address all these different types of inequities, but actually we need to choose one and go with that one to have an impact. So here, this slide is to just show that institutional racism impacts all these different indicators, from jobs to housing to arts and culture. And some of those manifestations, which I would hope, the HRC, you all being here, would have a better understanding about this than the average person, shows up in, for example, with jobs. There was a study that came out recently about the discrimination early on in the hiring process of even just seeing someone's name on a resume, and the impact that people of color are already at that point at a disadvantage of being able to move through a hiring process equally to their white counterparts. Housing, here we have in the bottom right corner a map of redlining, so a historical racially discriminatory practice that was done by the government that drew a literal line on a map, a red line on a map around certain neighborhoods or neighborhoods of people of color to tell banks where they were able to or not able to provide loans and invest in, which then had a consequential negative impact for residents there and their communities. Healthcare, we see both lack of accessibility, but then also less quality of healthcare. A study came out recently that pain is not acknowledged as equally. Pain by people of color, by patients of color, is not acknowledged as the same as for white patients. So imagine the impact of care provided there. Our criminal justice system, so we know that with mass incarceration, disproportionately, there's a disproportionate minority contact, which is not representative of our demographic breakdown nationally. The environment, so asking questions around, so this is air quality, water quality, asking questions of where is trash dumped, where are highways built. Arts and culture, access to what kinds of arts and culture are being funded. Education, we see different, both quality of education, but school closings, types of resources that schools have, and then equitable development. So where is transit being built? Where are other types of infrastructure and resources being allocated? The impacts of this, my background's in social work, and so this is a list of just parts of wellness for us as humans. And so the impact of that, and I do that to try to bring us out of our cerebral selves into our hearts, which is that financially this means not only just a lack of funds, but it also means then an inability to invest, which we know here in our capitalistic society that means then there's a lack of economic mobility. Emotionally, there's severe trauma. There's a great report out of New York University's McSilver Institute about the trauma of racism. Physical manifestations, so both in one's physical health and then also in safety. So what forms of neighborhoods or institutions is one a part of where you feel safe and are safe. And then socially, various networks or neighborhoods that people are a part of. For example, if my network is that I have many people who have a similar educational background as me and we are able to work in a similar place, then I have people who know me, who can advocate for me, and versus those who may not have some similar connections. So I share all of that because it is a national issue. We have a deep history of racism in our country, and that is the impact, and it exists here in Washtenaw County. We are not immune to that. So the graphic on the left is showing us that for some people, that arrow going up this is a great place to live. Some of these things, various accolades and various, awards that we have received are showing us that for, quote, millennials, it's a great place, or for families, or for tech grads. But then on the other side, we're seeing that this isn't a good place for many people to live, and that there's actually deep disparity and inequality here. So Washtenaw County is ranked 80th out of 83 for income inequality out of the state of Michigan. We have a racial gap of more than 30 to 40 points in student test scores. Ann Arbor in particular is the 8th most economically segregated city. Washtenaw County is the most expensive rental market in Michigan, which then causes unaffordable housing. And then, as I was just discussing, in terms of upward income mobility, we're at the bottom 8% for that. So further, 60% of African Americans live in low opportunity areas in our county. There's a 9-year life expectancy difference between residents in Ypsilanti than there are in Ann Arbor, and that's 16 years for Latino residents. Black babies are twice as likely to be born at a low birth rate and 6 times more likely to grow up in poverty. And for Latino babies, that is 3 times more likely to grow up in poverty. The history of how, I guess, this initiative has come to fruition and why I'm here is that in 2015, the county produced a report. So the Office of Community and Economic Development released this report, the Housing Affordability and Economic Equity Analysis, which showed this, which showed both economic and racial segregation. And the Opportunity Index is this tool that has been produced that you can go online and you can play around with it that shows low to high opportunity areas in our area. And then an equity summit was called in 2015 where over 300 different people came, from elected officials to county staff to residents to cross-sector representatives. And of course, not only in 2015, but historically there's always been community led and driven work to advance racial equity. Back in 2016, so a year after that, there was a working board session for the Board of Commissioners with a couple of our leading departments who are doing this work already, which includes the Public Health Department and also the Office of Community and Economic Development. And it came to conversation that there should probably be an ordinance to really name that this is a priority and a commitment for the county. In that process, it became clear that actually that the county had a lot to learn about racial equity. And just as I started this presentation in saying that not all of us have the same understanding of institutional racism, that was what the landscape was looking like, was people not really understanding the full impact and gravity of the work. So what that meant was that the county, in relationship with the city of Ann Arbor, hired GARE, which is Government Alliance on Race and Equity. So GARE is a national network of government that's working to advance racial equity. Here is a map. They work with over 200 municipalities across the country, and these are some of their principles. So they use a racial equity framework, so naming racial equity very clearly. They build organizational capacity, so the idea is not just to come in and out, but they have come and worked with us to help us see what we need in order to really make it a part of our organizational culture. They believe in implementing racial equity tools. And that is distinct because sometimes you can apply tools that you think would help, but actually without an anti-racist or racial equity lens, it can perpetuate what we are already doing. That we are data-driven, so knowing what exactly is going on and then being able to see the outcomes by data. And partnering with other institutions, so knowing that in order to advance both as government, we need to be working with all different types of institutions, and that we operate with urgency and accountability to the community. So last year, the Board of Commissioners had a working session where GARE came and presented to them. And then the city of Ann Arbor the next day, also with other county department heads, came and met and had a presentation from GARE. And then there was a resolution passed by the Board of Commissioners, so the county, to declare its commitment in moving forward with this work. So here we are in 2018. We are now in what we call kind of phase 2 of this work, and the name One Community Advancing Racial Equity in Washtenaw County has started this year. You'll see in parentheses that it says in Ann Arbor, and that's because, or it says Ann Arbor and that's because originally that was its original title, but we are hoping to build out partnership across the entire county, and so it doesn't make sense necessarily to just have one jurisdiction that's highlighted. Under that is GARE's model, which is that we first need to normalize this conversation. We need to name race and racism. We need to educate ourselves about it and have a shared understanding of it. Operationalize it, so make sure we have resources and tools to be able to do it, and then organize, so really make sure that we are changing outcomes. Some of the things that have happened this year are that I was hired, which is great, and a survey was administered, which I'll go into. I'll go into all of these. GARE did 7 trainings with us from January to May, which some of the city staff participated in. And then some of the plans that are upcoming and also happening now are an equity lens into part of the budget process, a proposal for an Office of Racial Equity plans, community engagement, communications and structure, and a training protocol, and then also a draft ordinance, which I have a copy of for everyone here. So the survey that was administered is meant to be a baseline. So this was a survey that GARE has written, and it is meant to be given to all staff in order to gain a general understanding of how does the staff understand racial equity. And do they see it as important? What tools might they need to advance it? It will be conducted every 2 years, which will then allow us to see where are we making progress and where are we not, where may we need to shift our focus. As I said, we've had 7 different trainings from different tools that GARE's provided, to talking about community engagement, to how to figure out how to train others, like to ripple out training so that it's not just isolated with them. It is our quadrennial budget time, so that means that the county is going through the process of deciding the budget for the next 4 years, so that'll be passed this fall or by the end of the year. There's a surplus of funds where, a bucket of funds where the Budget Task Force incorporated, which I think is awesome, a new kind of equity lens, which is that they asked on their form for that specific funds that people could request money from. They asked specifically, how is this project advancing racial equity, and had a whole subset of questions for that. So that's an example of how we can embed this into all of our processes and how we function. And I drafted a racial equity office, so I talked to over 20 offices around the country who are doing this work to learn from them what's their staffing structure like, what are their staff doing, what are their outcomes like, how do they engage with the community. And so I drafted a proposal, which is being reviewed and is a part of the quadrennial budget process. And then racial equity plans were started during the GARE training, but the idea would be that departments and hopefully eventually cross-departmental initiatives will both plan and be held accountable to racial equity plans. So looking at their specific department, identifying racial inequities, coming up with a plan to advance that, and then doing it. And other plans consist of community engagement. So I find that there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation right now, which is that because the office isn't itself it's not in existence yet, it's just me, that much of what should be happening is not, because we don't have the capacity. But we've applied for a grant for community engagement, which would be funding leaders, whether recognized or under-recognized, of color, particularly in the county, to work together through storytelling to identify what are priorities to them instead of just looking at data, so coupling both data and experience. And also, a little plug, we've been also having feedback sessions from the community for the ordinance, which we have, so folks feel free to take this. This one is for the one that's coming up in Ypsilanti next week. For communications, we have a newsletter, there's a website, I just started a cool Facebook, everyone should follow it. It's called Washtenaw County Advancing Racial Equity. And it's important that this work is not just an office, so structurally it shouldn't be just an office, it shouldn't just be a couple leaders, it needs to be fully a part of our culture. So what GARE says is both breadth and depth, meaning that all departments across all departments are a part of this, and then also depth. So hierarchy level doesn't matter. This applies to all of our work, and in order for us to change our institutions, we all have to understand that and be committed to that. Train the Trainer is this is a way for us to do more of our internal education. So staff have been trained in the Intro to Racial Equity content that GARE provided us, and the idea will be that they will be training their colleagues in this content so that it becomes just a part of the culture that people go through the racial equity training. And then finally, there's a draft county ordinance, which Commissioner Felicia Braybeck has really spearheaded. And as you heard, in 2016, there was a draft ordinance then. So here we are doing it again in hopes that it'll be passed in August. And that is highlighting definitions of what this work is, and then also on those 3 levels of racism, so individual, institutional, and structural, how we are committing ourselves to making change in those areas. And lastly, on that note, is just that we, historically as government, we used to have explicit policies, which then became implicit, but what we still found is that race neutral, so not naming race in policies still didn't mean that, of course, there wasn't racial impact. And therefore, we have to have intentional intervention in order to change that, which is what this ordinance really is it's just a beginning, and it's just a mark to say we're committed to this, and we care about this, and we want this to change. And the how, of course, will still need to be decided, in my opinion, which should be intentional, and it should be community co-created and driven, and a really robust process, and not just one person deciding it for an ordinance. So that is all I have, and I'm happy to talk more about it, obviously, and hear any questions from anyone, if I'm allowed, and talk also about, the HRC as a unit, but then also how it relates to the city of Ann Arbor. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
You did a superb job.
Thanks, Dwight.
Could I ask you a question? Who originally seeded GARE?
Who originally seeded it?
The money?
So the contract was $77,000 total, and it was split between the city of Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that that results from the baseline survey would be shared at the end of June. Have those been shared?
Yeah, good question. So they have been shared. Oh, sorry, which one?
The one to the right.
This one? Yeah, and please.
I got like 2 or 3.
Yeah, actually, maybe you only have 2. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But it's on Facebook, if that's helpful at all. Sorry. Thank you. So we have had the results shared with our action team. So we have an action team, which is 8 people, which includes department heads from public defenders to community and economic development to public health to our county administrators. And we were provided the survey results as that team, and now what we have decided, which I have to confirm with the whole action team, but what we're moving towards is probably that I will go and present to each department what those results were. So that's kind of a rollout phase.
Are those results are internal only, or?
No, I'm not. Well, as of now they are, but I'm not sure if they need to be. And so that's a good question. My brain is on how do we even just get this to the people that took this and work here, but that's a good question.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting. I mean, I think obviously you probably need to anonymize it if it hasn't been, but I think it'd be interesting information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you talk about departments, are you talking about county departments or city also?
For the survey?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm only talking about the county. The city has not participated in the survey.
Okay.
How come?
That is a good question. My understanding is that the city didn't feel ready, and then there was potential conversation of doing it this fall, but I'm not sure if that's moved forward. And I think that there was some departments that were eager to do that and try that for the benefit of knowing, and being able to make progress. And so I'm not entirely sure where that stands right now.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple of questions. First of all, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. The county ordinance, and as I followed you on followed through on the presentation and then researched on ordinance. I just, it wasn't clear to me, it's an equity ordinance, is it going to be akin to our non-discrimination ordinance? Or is the scope broader? What's the, can you talk a little bit more in depth about that?
Sure. Well, I'm not entirely sure what your non-discrimination ordinance is.
Fair enough.
Sorry. But my understanding would be that this is really looking at, I'm assuming that based on how you also were talking about it before, is that it seems like they're, well, maybe instead of assuming, would you mind paraphrasing what that ordinance really means specifically?
Yeah, the
What'd you say?
concept really is
Yeah.
that people cannot be discriminated against by virtue of their membership in a protected class. And there's a long list of protected classes that I'm not going to rattle off all of them because I can't off the top of my head, but you can well imagine what they are. And the reason we exist, one of the reasons that we as a commission exist, is that when people in the city of Ann Arbor feel that they have been discriminated against on the basis of being a member of a protected class, then they can file complaints with us, and one of our rules is to resolve that. We also, the ordinance also affords us the opportunity to review contracts, or at least notify contractors that they have to abide by the non-discrimination ordinance in terms of their hiring practices and things like that. That's a really high-level thumbnail sketch. Anyway, that's the gist.
So I think that this is a little more broader in the sense that it's asking us to not only, so twofold. One would be that, you know, the HRC is kind of a reactive body, right? So if something happens, then you all respond to it. And this is asking us to look at even more broadly, how do we actually make our services more accessible generally? So what I mean, a tangible...
It's more proactive.
Yes, it's more proactive, and a tangible example of that would be how are we recruiting for our jobs, or how are we writing our job descriptions. So there's a lot of editing and different work that we can do to actually make a job description way more accessible to people and equitable. So that's what we are looking at in all of our processes. Or for example, one of the departments that I've been totally excited about is our Office of Infrastructure and Management, because at first it kind of was like, how does this relate to us? We don't directly serve people, and so we don't understand our connection to this work. And then through learning and through conversation, there are ways for us to see and to look at their processes and see how they are determining how to fund certain buildings, right, or certain infrastructure or certain technology projects, and they can use an equity lens through that. So it's, again, that would, a discriminatory incident would never probably come out of that, right? No one's going to like see if a building that is serving primarily people of color versus an admin building is getting funded differently. But that has inequitable outcomes.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a little more broad.
So the ordinance is meant to just sort of create the impetus and really the legal authority to do this, to create a more equitable county, throughout all of the offices and things like that.
Yes, and I think too, something that is, I don't know, gray, or sometimes people have questions around, is that this is obviously internal facing. So we are looking at our internal operations and saying, how are we hiring internally? How are we, not only hiring, but all of our HR processes, but also we are an institution like yours that does services to the community. So we also are having, connection to the community. So there's indirect impact or external services that we also have to take into consideration. So it's both internal facing, but then I would also say, community facing.
And actually, some of that's a nice segue into my next question, which is, are you in communication with the folks at the University of Michigan who are doing the DEI work?
So not formally.
DEI, I should say out loud, diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Yeah, thank you. So not formally, I went to school there, and so am informally linked there with the School of Social Work, but we have, and I should have said this, on July 24th, so in a couple weeks, we're actually having a partnership build-out meeting where we've invited like 10 other municipalities to come to talk and collaborate and be a part of the initiative, so it's not just Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County. And so we are looking at, after we kind of do that, building out into other sectors, and in particular, talking with the university.
I will just offer myself as a resource, probably as much as a professional, as a member of this commission, I work in the Office for Institutional Equity at the university,
Nice.
which is part of the bigger Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And if you're looking to connect up with folks who can talk about how to implement a plan like this on a community-wide basis, you know, I work with some of those folks on, if not, I don't work with them on a daily basis, but I know them, and I'd be happy to connect you if and when you feel like that would be useful.
Cool.
The other thing, you know, the other example you gave was, you know, how to write better job descriptions. I know that there is a specialist at the University of Michigan who follows me in part of a training session I do, and in fact, I do some of that work too, but not nearly as detailed. Part of my, this one particular training, part of my work is just making people aware that they need to make their, generally speaking, their language as inclusive as possible, and not put things in there that actually will weed people out because they'll look at it and say, oh my gosh, this is not for me, and then unintentionally be discriminated against. But there are some great people who do that work. So
Cool.
At any time, I'm happy to chat with you about that.
Awesome, thank you. Appreciate that.
So, some of what you have said, it sounds wonderful, thank you for presenting, but it's theory. So, I'm more interested in practicum.
Me
And
too.
I'm gonna, so I'm going to throw out just a what if, or for instance, would you consider in your theory transitioning to practicum something that we've discussed here in the HRC, and that is using the example of writing better job descriptions. The theory part is you can make it as nice as you possibly can until you get to the point where you have to select the individuals who may have applied. Then how do you deal with, we've already determined who's going to fill that position, we're just going to post it to meet the minimum requirement. Or, this one's nearer and dear to my heart, ban the box. Stop asking the questions until it becomes absolutely, if it becomes absolutely necessary. So how does your organization attempt to address at least those two areas? There's more, but I'll stop there for now.
Sure. So I think that we are, I guess, two-part answer. One is that we're not fully there yet. That is what I'm hoping the office, you know, with more staff and resources would be able to address. But I will say that one of the trainings with GARE was looking at workforce in particular. So we're starting a workforce working group. Actually, our first meeting is next week. And so we'll be able to start to share kind of those best practices and then also talk with other experts around the country who have done really great work. Something I'm also hearing you say, though, which is, I know the greatest question for me, is around accountability. So we can say that we have this policy, we can conceptually agree with it and all of that, and that doesn't necessarily mean that anything will particularly change unless we hold ourselves accountable to that. And that is a question that has been coming up a lot, and for me, again, should be community co-created. It should be, I think it would take not a long time, but shouldn't be done in haste, and really will require what I think is a culture shift. What does it really look like if I'm a restorative justice practitioner, so I would hope that, you know, I don't believe in punitive approaches, and I don't think that that inspires anyone or motivates anyone to do the work, but really how do we create systems where we are ensuring that this is both being practiced and that we are actually changing outcomes. I don't have an answer.
We're coming to the end of our meeting, and as I told Anna when I asked her, I told her that we could easily take a whole meeting and more, and I think we will ultimately. But just for now, and I wanted to introduce you, but for now, what I wanted to do was to ask you, is there anything that we can do now for you with this ordinance? I mean, what is our first step, and how can we help you?
Yeah, so I guess twofold. One is that we're hoping it'll be passed on August 8th, so the more that there is support of that, public support, the better. So please feel free to come to the session in Ypsilanti, which I can leave this with you all and send you information later. There are also people who have been just, sharing your support even through writing us is really important. And also, I would say that, this is important for us, but I would also encourage that you all are also looking at this, at City Council, at your own council, and looking at what are their steps for that and what might their resolution or drafts or ordinances also look like as it relates to this. But yes, please show up, be public, follow the Facebook, share with your friends, tell them all to come. Yes, thank you.
Keep us in mind. We will keep you in mind when we do our strategic planning, which is what the last thing I want to cover in this meeting.
Cool.
As to what we might, what are our priorities, but please let us know if there's something that you would like us to add to that, because
Great. Yes, I will think more about
we
that.
care about this stuff.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much. Are people willing to have a strategic planning? We talked about it before. We are now down one person. However, I think we shouldn't wait. I think we should just do it. I'm hoping, I think it'll take more than 2 hours. I'm thinking a half day. Is that reasonable? And not meeting on our regular meeting time in August. I think we'll have enough to do, but I'm not sure. I mean, I'm willing to meet in August too.
You're saying sort of in a work session like City Council does, like in the workroom kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Something like that, maybe where we can eat. We won't be videotaped, but we will have to post it. But we need to talk about things like, we're talking about things like whether we need training and how that will work, whether we want organizations to come in, but even most importantly, what do we want to accomplish in the next 12 to 18 months? Where do we want to spend our time? Where do you think it's going to pay off the most? And I think that's very important. We haven't done that in a long time. So I'll send out a doodle and get times from people. Just a sense, can I just get a rough sense? Is Saturday morning, or, I mean, I know people work, so I'm trying to figure out, when I doodle, what are the times that most people are willing to do it? Any thoughts about that?
What time frame, like how long are you envisioning this as being?
I'm thinking 4 hours, maybe. I don't think anybody wants to spend more than that. Maybe 3, but, yeah?
Saturday morning would work fine for me.
Yeah, weeknights, weekends.
Is that a good time for everybody?
I'm just wondering if maybe we should send our schedules.
I'm gonna send you a way to, I'm gonna give you options.
I see.
Online, you're gonna fill out a thing. But I can't give you every minute, so I'm trying to narrow it down a little bit.
Sure.
Okay? Okay.
I'm out of town the first 2 weeks in August.
Okay.
So that's
I'm
a
out of
big
country
chunk.
the second 2 weeks.
First
of
tune,
August.
and I'm out too, so we may not be able to do it, but let's try. First 2 weeks in August.
Yeah, the last 2 weeks of August, I'm out of the country.
Okay, last 2 weeks.
So maybe September's better.
It may be
Maybe
better.
early
You think that's
September.
possible?
And then the question is, do we have an August meeting or not? How many other people will be away?
Well, just.
August meeting is the
Leslie
8th now.
and Corinne. Leslie.
Yeah, I won't be here on the 8th, just me.
You won't be?
Anyone else?
I'll be here first half, yeah.
I could be here. I could go. I'm leaving the 9th if it's not the 8th. So we do need it, you think we do need it for the trespass stuff?
I think at least
Okay.
that's a commitment that that's a statement that we committed to.
So are most of us able to do it the 8th?
Yes.
Okay, let's have it the
I can
8th.
speak only for myself.
I'll do the
Yes.
doodle and see if we can do it in, I'll see if July or August is possible, and if not, well, August.
August,
No, never mind.
September.
September. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Great, I think we're done.
Okay.
Don't we have to approve minutes
Yes, oh gosh, minutes. Yes, thank you, we do. Sorry, I forgot about the minutes. I hate to say this, but I don't think I even included a copy of my minutes.
Here, yeah.
I mean, did you?
Here's a hard copy.
These are, I don't think these are the minutes after I,
Yeah, they are.
oh, are they?
Yeah, they
Oh,
are.
good, okay, thank you. Then I do have minutes, because I have a bunch of those. Okay.
So you made,
Why was Corinne's name highlighted the first time I was here?
Highlighted where?
The
On the
first time.
first page,
Yeah,
under agenda discussion and approval.
like no other names are highlighted, it's just Corinne.
I don't know.
I want to say that if anybody's name deserves to be highlighted,
Highlighted,
it's
it's
Corinne.
I guess so.
Period.
I highlighted it. I will say when I sent it to Heather,
Oh.
because Nancy had not filled in who did it, so.
Oh.
Thank you.
It was a fill in the blank? Yeah,
Yeah, and I highlighted it for Heather, so.
mystery solved.
Okay, so we probably don't want her name highlighted in the final minutes. Any other questions about these minutes?
so Leslie, you made some changes that
I
you
did
sent
make-
to us.
That's right. I
okay.
always do
Okay.
something.
Just
if-
to be clear, that
Yeah,
they're
'cause I-
slightly different than what Nancy wrote.
Right, right, but by and large, they were lovely. Okay, can we,
I move to accept the minutes from the June meeting as amended.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Yay. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.